Good morning. Good morning. I am Susan Smith. I am working on a vintage Lone Star quilt and quilting in real time today. So, for those of you who may be new or just popping in today, my goal with these quilting sessions that are live is just to kind of show the reality of the process. I know when I was a beginning quilter, quilting on a long arm because it's so huge, right? It's kind of a solitary thing. You can't just take it over to your friend's house and quilt with them. And of course, that's the best way to learn is working alongside someone, right? So I remember those challenges of just thinking, I don't know how to approach basting, or what's the best way to load a quilt, or how do you address points that don't match when you're quilting, all those sorts of things. So, over the last couple of weeks and in the future, I'm going to be doing more and more of these live and kind of unscripted, certainly unedited episodes. So, you'll get me quilting in real time. I kind of talk through the problems as I'm coming up on them in the quilt, how I address them, what my thought processes are. So, it's not so much a lesson because lots of times there's not right ways or wrong ways. I'm just kind of talking through my way of thinking through the process and how I address things in my quilt. So, this particular project, as you can see in the camera, I think, is a Lone Star. And I acquired just the star portion actually at a garage sale. And I'm going to call it vintage. I don't know exactly how old it is, but judging by the fabrics, I would say more than the 70s, like older than the 70s. It is, I think, 100% cotton. The fabric content is fairly nice, bit thin, bit fragile, and certainly unskilled piecing. Let's just put it that way. Any of the points that match of the diamonds, I think, was a happy accident. Far more do not match than do. So I kind of saw, in this little rumpled up heap, because it was just stuffed into a basket at this garage sale, I kind of saw what I thought might be a gem, kind of in rough shape. And so I brought it home and I pressed it as best I could. Some of it is hand pieced, some of it is machine pieced. Some of the seams were sewn multiple times in multiple places, so you couldn't do open seam allowances, all kinds of issues on the back of it. So I pressed it as best I could. I pressed under a seam allowance on the perimeter of it, and I hand appliqued the whole thing onto this kind of linen-y colored background. And I love Paintbrush Studio solids, and so I've used their linen color. That's what my background is. And now I'm setting out to quilt it. And as I go, I'm just addressing the things that come up as I get to them. So one of them that you're going to see today is that the sides of these points of the stars are not straight. And yesterday, I should mention, in a previous episode, I quilted the star itself and put something in each of the diamonds. And yesterday I was doing that live, and there were some ladies on, and we kind of chatted back and forth about what could be quilted in each of these diamonds, how much quilting to do, whether or not to stitch in the ditch. Those sorts of things we kind of talked about. And one of the conclusions was not to stitch in the ditch of the diamonds, though at first glance I would say this would benefit by having a little more stitching to hold some of these tucks and things down a little flatter. Yet because the points don't match, you'll see some closer ups as we work with the camera, but some of these points have 3/8 of an inch or even half an inch that don't line up. And so if I were to try and stitch in the ditch along that line, where would I go at those points, right? Would I stitch in the wrong color? Would I jog my stitching that far? I just concluded that was just a headache waiting to happen. So I decided not to stitch in the ditch for this particular project. So that's just an example of the kind of decisions I'm making as I go through it. What else shall I tell you? A little housekeeping, I guess. We're doing this live in Facebook, obviously, if you're here watching. But my husband is the cameraman and the producer behind the show. So he's also loading each of these episodes onto my YouTube channel, which is also Stitched by Susan. So by the next day, 24 hours later, it will be loaded there. So you can go back and watch it there if you prefer the YouTube platform. And they'll also be in my Facebook group always. So you can go back and reference them at any point. They are live, they are unedited. So you will occasionally see oopses. You'll see me run out of bobbin thread. You'll see me have to undo something where I made a mistake. That's all going to be part of it. I want you to just see the exact process as I quilt. The only thing that's, of course, not as exact is I don't usually wear a microphone when I'm quilting. I usually have headphones over my ears and a good audible book going on. So you guys will have to talk to like keep me occupied, right? So let me know where you're tuning in from. Let me know if you've been here before. I'll probably recognize your name if you have. Maybe let me know if you've just found me and are interested in this type of live and sort of unscripted quilting. So all that being said, today I'm going to be working on the background. So the entire star now is quilted. The entire quilt was basted, just a line across at the top and bottom of each pass. So not in a grid format, just every so often a line across the entire quilt. This star is all on the bias, all of these diamonds. So as you might imagine, that is a bit stretchy. And though I appliqued it onto a solid background to save the bulk of all the fabric, making it sort of thick and unwieldy, after it was all appliqued on, I flipped the quilt upside down and I trimmed away all this background from behind the star. So in fact, this star was quite stretchy and a bit wonky. So I chose to base the quilt every probably 16 or 18 inches all the way down so that I knew that everything was straight and square. Got it all put together. So as I go now, I'm undoing the basting. You can see here, it leads up right here. It leads up on this side, and I've undone it in the star. You don't want to be stitching over that basting or it will get very difficult to undo. So you'll see that as I work today. I'll undo the basting areas as I come to them. So I did do one thing overnight to kind of save on time today, and that was that I started marking the border that I'm going to put around the star. Now this was a quilting decision that I made. I saw a photograph actually on social media of someone who had done this on a lone star, and I thought it was pretty spectacular. She had quilted a border around the star that just really framed it and made a statement, and I thought, I want to do that on my lone star. So I've marked, I'm not sure how well you can see it on the camera, but I've marked a 4-inch border outside of the point of my star. And because the star almost covers the whole quilt top already, the points at the sides and the top and bottom actually run right off the quilt, and I'm okay with that. So the border is, it would extend beyond the edge of the quilt. So it's going to look a little bit cut off. I have not done that before. Not sure whether I'm going to like that or not, but I wanted to give it a try. So this quilt is going to be the guinea pig. What else? I'm going to start today by putting my ruler plate on my quilting machine. This is Lucy, by the way, my quilting machine. And I'm going to stitch in the ditch around the entire perimeter of the star. I think that will kind of fix it in place. And as I go, you'll see the points of these lines are not perfectly straight by any means. And I think if I was doing it again, I think I would have taken a long ruler and I would have trimmed those straight before I appliqued my star onto the background. But I didn't. That's done. That's how it is now. So I'm just going to quilt in the ditch, following the line of the piecing, however inaccurate that may be. And I made my 4-inch border be straight. So hopefully the eye will read straight border, even though it's not necessarily even. And you'll see some of that as we go. So I'm going to put the ruler plate on, and we shall begin. Feel free to type in questions into the comments if you have any. From time to time, I'll pause and read them out so that everyone can hear them. Add a cue, if you would, in front of them. It makes it easier for us to see them. And also, I usually go back after the live episode and actually type in answers so that people reading them afterwards can see the answers to your questions without necessarily having to hunt for them in the whole video. For time today, just so you know what to expect, yesterday we were live a little over 2 hours, I believe. Dave, is that right? Today it might not be quite that long. We'll see how it goes, but it will certainly be 1 hour. So come and go, get yourself a hot beverage. Like I said, it's not a class. It's not, you know, points that I'm making in a row. So it's just a chance to basically look over my shoulder in my studio and see how I produce a quilt. So here we go. I'm going to rewind the quilt just a little bit before I start quilting and show you some of the marking. I left a little bit of it undone so that you could see this process too. So do you want to put the close-up camera on, Dave? I'm not sure which is the best. Is that going to show enough? Okay, I'll pull it over. I'll just pull my close-up camera. Don't get dizzy. Let's see how this works. Yeah, that's pretty good. So I'm using actually a cutting ruler for my marking today because it's the longest and the widest one that I have. So I think you can probably see under this ruler, I'll put the ruler against it. See how unstraight that line is? So here's from my center point of the star, which is way in here, all the way out to the tippy tip of it. I've got the ruler lined up at the tip in the center, and you can see the ruler's not even against a lot of the way along. So what I'm going to do is just eyeball this, right? I'm lining up my ruler close to my 4-inch mark at the tip of the star point and at the intersection, the inner star point. And I'm letting this line just kind of fall where it may. In some areas, I've got a little less than a 4-inch border. In some areas, I've got a little more than a 4-inch border. And I'm marking with a blue water erasable marker. And so I've just traced one single line on there. That hardly shows, but you can see it. And then I'm going back, and with another ruler, I'm marking in my 1/4-inch echo that I want to quilt. I find, and I learned this tip, I think, from Judy Madsen, it is much more difficult to quilt an accurate pair of lines. Well, I should word it the other way. It's much easier to quilt an accurate spacing between a pair of lines if they are pre-marked. It's, even though my quilting ruler has a 1/4-inch marking on it, somehow it's easy to be a thread or two wider or narrower. So I find it easiest to go ahead and mark both those lines. I will end up with a much more accurate pair of parallel lines when it's all said and done. I'm going to hold a pen under here too for you to show, or a tool. It's not really a pen. This is by Sew Line. Yeah, this way. There we go. It's by Sew Line, and it actually is a tiny little canister that holds water. And it has this little tip on the end. It's kind of a sponge, and you can guess what that's for. That is for erasing my water-soluble pen. But what's beautiful about this, of course, is it's got such a fine tip. And so it's easy to erase a line or a dot marking or something like that without having to spritz your quilt, right? And having the whole thing disappear on you when you didn't intend that to happen. So that's a great little tool by Sew Line. I'm going to shift the quilt a little bit. We've got to mark that top upper point yet. So I just follow that through. I'm just extending the line that I already created, because of course it extends way out beyond the pieced point of my star. I'll take a question now. I can talk and mark at the same time. Very, very seldom. For one thing, the type of quilting I don't do tons and tons and tons of marking. And even when I am working on a custom quilt, I generally do my marking after it's on the frame. One notable exception to that was, and you would have to look back through some of my photos and posts to see this, but last year I did a vintage quilt. It was for a challenge in our Machine Quilting Guild, and you can recognize it easily because it's quite clematis or iris colored, not to say purple, light purple. If you check out that quilt, it has a lot of very strong diagonal lines across the entire width of the quilt. So I did mark that one beforehand because I did not think I could keep those diagonal lines running straight while rolling my quilt back and forth. So before I loaded it, I marked some diagonal lines all the way across the quilt, about every 12 or 14 inches. And I didn't necessarily quilt those lines, but I used them as reference points, if that makes sense. But in terms of my actual quilting like this, I always mark on the machine. Different quilters might have different preferences. I don't know that that's a right or a wrong. That's just my way. Here's another example. Which camera have you got on now, Dave? So hopefully you can see the ruler here. Once again, I've got it lined up way up at the tip of my star point and way in at the inner corner of the star point. And you're seeing the curved area under the ruler. I'm just eyeballing that and kind of taking an average, if you will. So some places that 4-inch border is going to be a little wider, some places a little narrower. And I will show you this. Up at the top edge, you can see the top of my quilt, right? My border is going to run right off that edge, and I'm just going to extend my line wherever it falls, right off that edge. I just have to move the machine because I can't draw over top of the ruler plate. So I'm going to draw that line in. I'll quickly trace my 1/4 inch echo, and then I think we're ready to start quilting. Which is, of course, the fun part. Okay, the lines are all traced in. So once again, I'll run over to the point of the star, and you can see, I think, yep, there's the edge of the quilt, so you can see how my marked point runs right off the edge. We'll see how that looks when it's all said and done. You'll be as surprised as I am. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is quilt the stitch in the ditch around the star. So I don't need my big marking ruler anymore. That is all done. We'll get it out of the way. This little ruler that I'm using, by the way, is by A1, which is a long arm machine brand, but it was introduced to me by another quilter, and I purchased it, though I don't run an A1. That doesn't really matter. They'll sell the ruler to anybody. But I like the handle. You can see how it is on there at kind of a 60-degree angle. I like the fact that I can grasp it. I'm trying to get my hand where you can see it because I always do it with my left hand. I can grasp this ruler any number of ways, right? Holding it firmly in place. So whether this is your ruler choice or another one, I think there's probably others equally suitable, but something that has a handle for grasping. So there are reasons to use perfectly flat rulers, but for me, I don't keep very many rulers. This is my only straight quilting ruler, and I use it for everything. And there's much less fatigue on my hand as opposed to just using a flat ruler where I always had to grip it just like this, right? So that's my thinking there. I do have some other curved and shaped rulers, but this is the only straight one that I have, and I use it a lot. So when I'm doing a lot of straight line quilting, as I will be in this one, doing this border twice, this will be much less fatiguing, and it's just easy, right? I can spin it around in any direction and have a secure hold on it. So that's my preference for ruler. Rhonda, when quilting straight lines, how do you keep from getting knots on the back of the quilt? I don't know why that would be happening to you just on straight lines, but I would think that's some kind of tension timing issue. I don't have a problem with knots on the back of the quilt, I'll be honest. We're just going to pick a spot and start. Why don't we pick close down here to the bottom, and then we're just going to have to advance the quilt. We're going to be doing a lot of that today because we'll be working our way around this star a few times. Why am I not pulling up bobbin thread? Have I left my bobbin out? You guys that were here yesterday know that I set my bobbin down somewhere. I was refilling a bobbin and I set my bobbin case down and could not find it. It was hilarious. That's how quilting goes. But no, in fact, today I had it in. It was just, I had trimmed it short and it was not coming up. So you can see my basting threads off to the edge here. I'm just leaving them in. That holds that area of the quilt secure until I'm actually ready to start quilting there. And for this entire quilt, I am not burying my threads. I'm just doing a lock stitch. It's not ever going to be an heirloom quilt. There are just so many inaccurate things about it. So I think that's kind of overkill to do thread burying as well. So I've chosen not to do that. Do you know what? I am going to stop for a moment and talk about a decision here. I did all the quilting in the diamond area with a kind of cinnamon colored thread. I did not change for the aqua and red. I did the entire diamond with that cinnamon color. And I had debated in my mind about doing this feathered border that I'm going to do here also in the cinnamon color. So I'm curious if you ladies have any input on that. So it's 4 or 5 shades darker than the linen color of this cotton. What do you think I should do? Should I do my feather in that slightly contrasting cinnamon color, or should I go with something that matches more perfectly and just have texture as the focal point? So I'm just sitting here thinking for a minute, and I'm actually going to go grab my cream colored thread and lay it on here as well and try and make a decision on that. So how many people are online? Let's see. 15 people. You guys should just chime in on this and we'll just take a poll on it. I wonder if I have another spool of the cinnamon. I do. Let's see if I can get both threads here in a little pool. I've only stitched an inch or so yet, and so we can still change our minds on this. Yes. So this 4-inch border is going to have cinnamon or cream. It's not even cinnamon. I don't know what color to say it is. It's lighter than that. And I don't know how well they'll show on camera, Dave. I don't... I'm leaning... Well, maybe I shouldn't say what I'm leaning toward.
Jody is saying she would be matching. She is a little more conservative. Linda is saying she normally would do light. Cinnamon sounds lovely. Arlene
It's a
says
poser.
light. Sheila says I'm more confident, so we choose the blendy one. Pat is saying cream.
Wow, you guys are pretty overwhelmingly in favor of the cream. And honestly, I was leaning toward the cinnamon. It's a poser.
So the poll is 4-0 for cream.
Okay, I think I'm going to go with you guys and do the cream. And here's kind of my thinking here. I would have liked to branch out and try the cinnamon. I'm generally more matchy too, so that imperfections don't show. This quilt I thought was a great opportunity to try something different, but here's the problem. There are so many, as I've said 40,000 times, so many inaccuracies, not the least of which is this very unstraight line on my stars. And so I feel like I don't want to draw the eye to that area any more than I have to. So I think for that reason, the cream is a better choice. You guys, you're confusing me. No, I'm going to... I did, but there's only the one strand of it. If you want to put that close-up camera on, Dave, the basting is in the cinnamon. Let's see if I can get right over it so that you can see it. Can you see it there?
Yeah.
So that is one strand of the cinnamon thread. So it's not... Cinnamon really is a misnomer. It's not that dark. It's kind of a... It's half cinnamon. What's the comment, Dave?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Darker for not... True. I am not doing bump back feathers, so maybe I should have put that in the mix when we were talking about these decisions. I'm going to do a spineless feather, actually, so there will not be a lot of backtracking and not be a lot of thread buildup either. Match for bump feathers. Oh, you guys. It's just a poser. Okay, I've made a decision. I'm going to go with the cream. Another time we'll branch out. I love the idea of branching out and doing something different and having a feather border that contrasts a bit and pops a bit. I'm just not convinced that this quilt is the one for it because I'm trying so hard to distract the eye from that crazy unstraight edge. So cream it is. Decision made for this time. But thank you all for your input. I appreciate that. And I chose to do cream thread in the bobbin throughout so that I didn't have to change. There's not that many shades of difference. And my backing has several shades of cream in it. So I don't have to change that out. It's just a matter of changing the top thread. All right, cream for the win. So I am going to stitch in the actual ditch, however crooked it may be. I'm just going to follow it along, and I'm going to trust that the outer edge of my border being straight will trick the eye into thinking that I have a pretty straight border. Whoop, didn't make the ditch quite there, did I? I'll move out just a thread or two further. I have learnt over time, as admirable as it is to quilt right in the very ditchy ditch, it goes a lot faster, and I have a lot less accidental quilting over the edge of the fabric if I quilt a thread or two away from the ditch. So when I'm doing quilts, for example, that have a lot of applique, I purposely stitch just a little bit. Just 2 or 3 threads away. See there, I caught the edge a bit, and I don't really want to do that. So I just use my straight ruler, and I use this most of the time when I'm doing any kind of appliqued quilt. I just use my straight ruler as a kind of brace to have my hopper foot against. So even when I'm going around a curved edge, I often use a straight ruler because I don't have enough curved rulers to possibly match all the curved edges, right? And all I need is kind of a brace to hold my ruler against so that it doesn't inadvertently go where I don't expect. And I'm talking and not paying attention. I want to have room to get over the next peak without rolling. There's going to be a lot of advancing and rewinding of the quilt today. That's just the nature of it when you're doing something this large. It is certainly more time consuming to do this ditch because it's so awkward. But we'll do the best we can. You can see the crooked bits. Like I said, if I was doing it again, I think I would have either trimmed or pressed or both straight lines on the sides of these diamonds. And that's about as far as we can go. You'll see at this interior point here, there's quite a little curve there going on. So only time will tell how that's going to look in the finished result. For those of you who are coming in fresh today, I've used just one layer of Hobbs 80/20 cotton poly batting. Sometimes when I'm doing a show quilt and I want, you know, the quilting to really be the star of the show a little bit and to really pop, I'll put 2 layers of batting in, and that usually involves a fluffier batting like wool on the top. But this quilt, again, because I don't think it's of really fine enough quality to be an heirloom necessarily, I think that it's going to be a bed quilt. It's going to be a sort of daily use quilt. So for that reason, I felt like having the heaviness or the weight of double batting might not be desirable. So I've opted to go with what I use in my usual quilts, which is the Hobbs 80/20. I'm also using Isocord thread, which is my personal favorite. It is 100% polyester. It's a little bit glossy. It's very strong. And my favorite thing about Isocord thread is it comes in over 300 colors. And I love having the options of colors. I keep probably 50-ish in my studio at all times. And, you know, they're only a phone call away. So when I need to, I can quickly order up some more. And there is a shade for everything. Reds, for example. Do you know how many shades of red you want for quilting? Or even shades of gray. Not 50, but quite a few. And I do love having that option. I also wind my own bobbins. A couple reasons. It's economical. I'm a frugal quilter. And two, I like to have my bobbin thread match or very closely match what's on the top. And the pre-thread bobbins are somewhat limited in color. And so I choose to just wind my bobbins as I go. I do have a freestanding winder. So you'll see as I work today, whenever I change the bobbin out, I just quickly put on a new one and set it to winding. And so it only takes me that second or two, well, 3 or 4, that it takes to load a new bobbin. That's all the time that I invest in it. So I don't feel like it would save me a bunch of time to use pre-wound. So just my opinion. I've heard quilters say that pre-wounds have more consistent good tension, that if your bobbin winder is not running optimally, you can get funky winding on your bobbin, and I can see that point. I don't happen to have that problem. So I'm satisfied with my home wound bobbins. I'm curious, actually, this is a good question for discussion, how you ladies store your bobbins if you have all kinds of different colored ones. Currently, I have my thread on a thread rack and my bobbins in bobbin racks. But I would like to change that because with so many colors, with so many shades of gray, for example, sometimes it's difficult to tell which exact thread is on a bobbin. And what I don't want to do is start a quilt with a certain shade of bobbin and then change over and get it a little bit wrong. And then I've got 2 shades of backing thread going. So I'm trying to think of a way that I can store them together. And my best idea so far is that I need a deeper maybe drawer for my threads and to put a drinking straw through the top of the spools and stack the bobbins that match on that. But I would love to hear ideas. And even, you know, storage drawers or shelves that are a good height for storing thread and bobbin together. Or any other ideas that you may have. Quilters are very inventive people. So I would love to know if you have any great thread storage solutions. Just pulling out some basting thread again. I think I'll pull this one right out now. I mentioned yesterday, I'll show it again today. You can see that there's holes here a little bit in the fabric where the bobbin stitches were, and that's chiefly because there's quite a bit of tension on that basting thread as I pull the quilt back and forth. So it pulls those threads a little bit out of position. So one of my favorite tools, I mean, just handling the quilt and quilting over it is going to do some of the work of getting those threads back in place. But I also like this little surgical brush with soft bristles. Any small brush with fairly soft bristles will work. And so if these are still showing after my quilt is finished, I will mist that with water and just brush over those areas, and that just redistributes those threads and removes those markings pretty handily. And for my own quilts, I do actually immerse them in water after they're quilted. I have a bit of a horror of leaving the chemicals from marking tools in the fabric and having that, you know, show up over time when the quilt gets cold or hot or something like that. So I actually run my quilts through a super gentle cycle in my washing machine with a super gentle cleanser, and then I lay them flat to dry. I have a fairly large area on the side of my studio where I can push everything to the side and lay the quilt out to dry. And those of you who were here yesterday or see my pictures know that I have a black cat. He's a stinker when it comes to quilts. So my solution for that is I lay the quilt out flat and then I lay a flat sheet over top of it to dry. And if I want it to dry quickly, I set up a fan. But it will usually dry overnight. If there's one layer of batting, that will dry quite comfortably over one night. So I live in a dry area of the world, so that's one of the pluses. My quilts dry quickly. Speaking of said black cat, by the way, he is my quilting helper, and he's left of my feet about 4 feet, just curled up on the floor, and he is always in my studio with me. Is Dave seriously showing you the cat? Who knows what else is on the floor, because this is in real time, right? Who knows what else I've tossed onto the floor to get out of my way. And I'm kind of working at arm's length, so this is, yeah, not the best ditch stitching I've ever done, but we're getting there. I think there'll just be one more advance after this, and we'll be back around, I think. Okay. I'll just finish this ditch stitching, and then we'll take a moment to do some questions. Another very fudged corner. But I truly do think after the feather is quilted in the border, that's going to be the eye catcher. And my two parallel lines outside of the feather will establish a good solid straight line. I think it's going to look okay. No, I don't. I don't, Dave. That's the last advance because I started right in the middle here. Just going to pull this last basting thread out here. I mentioned yesterday, the machine I currently work on does have a basting stitch, which I love, but I only got this machine not that many weeks ago, and my machine before that did not have a basting stitch specifically, and I think the longest stitch size on it was 8 to the inch, which is still a pretty small stitch. So for basting on that one, I just set it on single stitch, and I just pushed a button for every stitch, and I just went stitch, 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 all the way across the quilt. So it can be done. And you know, I know quilters to this day who do not have stitch regulators, and they do ruler work and custom quilting, and it can be done. You get so used to whatever machine you have and whatever its capabilities it has. Oh, I caught the fold a little bit there. Don't you know, almost to the end, but I'm not going to go back and undo that. I'm calling it good. Okay, so we have edge stitched our star, just like that. Let's take some questions. Yes, let's do. Sam, do you always baste? Sorry I missed yesterday. I probably would have floated to avoid rolling. Is there a reason? A few reasons yesterday. You might want to go back and watch yesterday's episode, Sam. I do call this fairly simple basting in that I know that there are long arm quilters who baste almost in a grid fashion, so you know, both horizontally and vertically for very detailed custom quilting. I only did horizontal passes on the quilt, and I think I did perhaps 6 or 7 of them between top and bottom. My choices for that were several, but chiefly because the star is on the bias and is very stretchy and is not particularly straight. I didn't really have something to visually guide loading my quilt straight. So I'm a floater too of most quilt tops. But when I think there's any chance that it might shift or change as I'm quilting, and I do want this one to turn out nicely, I decided it was worth the, I don't know what it took me, 20 minutes at the most, a half an hour, to put those basting lines in. And then I just undo them as I come to them with my quilting, and it just keeps things from shifting. So bias is often a driving force behind that decision for me. Jody's asking, do you use anything besides water in that Sew Line Aqua pen? I only use water because I know I'm going to rinse the quilt afterwards. If you were truly using it to erase those lines permanently, you would probably want to have something else in there that, like baking soda or something neutralizing, but I don't. I just use water because I know that I'm going to wash my quilt afterwards and that will fully remove it. Any more questions? Oh, Linda, what machine frame do you have? What is your sewing space? I have a Gamel 26-inch Vision machine. I have a 12-foot frame. My sewing space is what should have been the family room in our home. So it's a basement. I'm not sure which camera I'm looking in, Dave. The gold one? Okay. It's a basement family room, and I've got a window on one side, and I've got a set of French doors on one end. So I have a fair bit of natural light, which I'm grateful for. And otherwise, it's just a rectangular room. So that's where I quilt. And it's always too full of stuff. But I think every quilt maker says that. You're always running out of room. I'm trying to decide at which point I think I'm going to very casually mark in the spine, if you will, for my feathers. Though I'm not going to quilt a spine, I'm going to want a guideline. I like to do a curved spine, and I think that is also quite eye-catching, so I like to have it pretty evenly spaced. But I think to begin with, I'll start at the top and work my way around, quilting the first border line. And then I think as I roll and advance my machine on the second one, I'll maybe mark that spine in. Or I can always mark the spine as I go. But anyway, let's get some of those lines quilted in. This is when it starts to look sharp, I think. Now I'm going to put my side clamps back on. I didn't have them on when I edge stitched. That was all pretty well stitched down already by my work on the star, so I wasn't too worried about getting any pleats in my background, in my backing. But now I will put my edge clamps on. Once again, take a few more basting threads out. There's not very many left anymore. Here we go. I'm just going to use the straight lines that I've already marked at this point. If you've never done ruler work before, I encourage you to give it a try. It is so rewarding. It gives such a spectacular result. And I also want to add, don't be discouraged when it doesn't turn out perfectly the first time. The first quilt that I remember doing with ruler work had an almost zigzag design across the quilt in straight lines, and I remember having so many wobbles on that quilt. But I also remember that by the time I got to the end of the quilt, it was going so much better. And it's just a matter of practice to learn how to grip the ruler just right, to learn how to put enough tension, like weight on the ruler against its table below and not too much. All those things are just a matter of practice. So I encourage you, give it a try. And maybe give it a try on a quilt where it's not the focal point, if that bothers you. A little more basting to take out. And if you recall yesterday, I mentioned that when I do the basting, I lock stitch at the beginning and end, and this is why. I can just yank those threads, and it won't undo my perimeter basting on the quilt, because I have lock stitched there. And I want to make it as easy as possible on myself. So this, as you can see, is going to take a little bit of time to go twice around the quilt like this. But so be it. Oh, I'll show you. There's a story on the edge clamps. The ladies who've been with me the last few days have heard this story more than once. But so this one came with my red snapper. Oh, I'm on this camera. This one came with my red snapper system, and it opens, and then when you fold it shut, it snaps around the fabric. And then it's got this elastic that my side clamp pulls on. I like this because all this produces even tension on the side of my quilt backing, right? So this, of course, was a pair, and one of them I broke. Eventually it wore out. So I ordered a new set. Well, the new set that came is quite different. This is kind of a waxed cardboard type thing, and it doesn't grip. I can't get it to hold a single layer of fabric. It just pulls off. So on the other side of my machine today, I only have clamps because that's all I've got right now. Whoops. Why am I trying to move my machine? That's not what I want to be doing. I just want to be clamping. So clamps on their own are not ideal because obviously it pulls the fabric right where the clamp is, and you're apt to get pulled areas on your quilt. So I just tell myself, don't put them on too tight. I don't want them to pull it out of shape. Stop right in that corner. I probably would not have to put the left clamps on when I'm working on the right side of the quilt, and vice versa. Now that I've got my whole star quilted, and I had a good look at the back of the quilt last night after we were off air, you know, I'm confident that there's no wrinkles or creases under there, so it's pretty well established. As you can see, the star extends almost to the outer edge. The unquilted areas are not very large anymore. So I'm not too worried about getting any wrinkles in my backing anymore. Yank those basting threads out. Okay, oh, one more. They're everywhere. What you don't want to do is only pull the top thread out and leave the bottom one in and stitch it repeatedly onto the back of your quilt. Asking for a friend, right? So maybe we'll just stop here and go right back on our echoing. Oh, heck yes. And my seam ripper and my scissors. So in case someone watching didn't hear the question, Sam was asking if I ever roll my ruler into the top area. Yes. Show me the quilter who has not done that. So I do have a 26-inch clearance, which is certainly nice for this project. If you had a smaller clearance, you'd never be done rolling this back and forth. You know, in which case I suppose you might rethink what type of design you were quilting. So while I'm doing this boring bit, now my ruler's going to roll off the front. I do this all the time too. Drop it on the floor. While I'm doing this boring bit, I encourage you, if you're willing, to share these episodes while you're watching and invite other quilters to view them. As I mentioned, my husband puts them up within about 24 hours on my YouTube channel. I would absolutely love if you would have a look at my channel and perhaps be a follower. And you will then get notifications when any new episodes are posted. And I am going to put my side clamp on because this is Don't know if you could see it on camera, but it's pushing the quilt just a little bit. So I just need some tension on this end of the quilt to hold it as I'm pushing toward my left. And this is where it comes in really handy to have that blue line pre-marked, because I can't really see well what's under my ruler. And also, how do I describe it? When you're quilting right in front of you, you're kind of looking down at the ruler from a certain perspective. When I'm quilting almost at arm's length as I was up there, pretty well impossible for me to get the same visual 1/4 inch, if that makes sense. So having it pre-drawn on there with the blue line helps me to get an even line. And I'll be honest with you, it still is not 100% perfect, but it's better than if I just did the visual 1/4 inch. Oh, remember the ruler. Throw it to the top. So I'm seeing a small problem here. My machine occasionally does not like stitching toward the left, and it frayed the thread there a little bit as I was coming across. So best possible place for it to happen when I'm stitching across in the basting area. So I'm just going to break thread and pull some thread through, because it didn't actually break any of the fibers. They were just separating and twisting funny. So just on the off chance, I don't want any thread breakages. If I can avoid them, I'm just going to break thread and start afresh. A little wobble there. So just because I'm curious, how many of you have worked on vintage projects before? I certainly don't want to be critical when I talk about, the points that don't match in this quilt, for example. I know that quilters of the past, of even 30 years ago, that's when I was learning to quilt with my mom, we didn't have access to, rotary cutters and diamond-shaped rulers and all those sorts of things. So I do not want to be critical when I talk about mismatched or sort of misshapen piecing in vintage quilts. However, it is a reality when you're working with them. There is seldom a high level of accuracy, and so my quilting choices are very often informed by that. Last week in my live episodes, I quilted 2 smaller vintage quilts that were not custom quilted. I just did an edge-to-edge design on them, and often that's my go-to answer. You can lay a lovely texture down over the quilt and get a really beautiful result, and not fuss with trying to do custom quilting, making, stitching in ditches that aren't straight, or doing ruler work toward points or intersections that don't match up. So I'm going to undo a little bit there. My own oops, I keep forgetting that when I've got my ruler plate on, I've got a much shorter, I'm used to how close I can quilt to my front rail, and of course when the ruler plate is on, that is a smaller distance, and I actually bumped into it. So in this case, though I have not been burying my threads anywhere else on the quilt, I'm going to here because it is in this long straight line, and I feel like having 4 or 5 lock stitches would be quite obvious there. Maybe it's not a big deal, but I'll just do one and then you can see how I would do that anyways. So I'm just going to undo a couple inches so that I've got some thread to work with. I'm having a really hard time undoing. There we go. Come on. Couldn't go smoothly when I'm on camera, could it? Okay, we've got a little bit to work with. That should do it. So I have a little needle, and it's called a spiral eye needle, which you will not be able to see in the camera, but basically there's a slit in the side of the eye of the needle, and that's what I use to do this. So I'm just going to use my fingers and my needle as an aid. I'll pull my camera closer, get the shadow off it, to put a knot in both threads together. Using the point of my needle, I go in the center of that knot and then pull it snug, and the knot now is quite close to the fabric. Thread my needle and pull it in just to my last stitch, and just gently tug, and that knot pops right in under the fabric. Trim my tails and leave a tail, at least a 1/2 inch tail, an inch is better, under there. And I'll keep my needle beside me because I'm basically going to reverse the process for my starting one. So I will now start my stitching exactly where I left off. This is trickier with a ruler than otherwise because I don't want to do a bunch of lock stitches. So here's my method. Because I don't have enough hands to hang on to my threads and hold them tight and hold my ruler, you know, and my machine, I'm going to thread my needle in through all the layers so it's good and firm, and I'm going to basically wind my thread on that. And I don't do this all the time, I'm just showing you guys options. So that will hold my thread so it can't pull undone. And now I can start stitching exactly where my last stitching left off. Pause again and do the same process of knotting the thread, pull it through, and then put my needle at the base of it, pull that snug, both layers, and there we go. Now a few of those stitches are a bit shorter, smaller, but by and large, anyone looking at this quilt afterwards will not be able to find where that started and stopped. And that was my goal. Oops, wrong one. I'm going to go ahead and come down to the next one since I rolled my quilt up so far. Could have gone either way. I could have gone back and done the other echo of that first one, but once again, a little basting to undo. There we go. And I'm just tugging a bit on the backing of my quilt on the left-hand side, making sure the front over the roller is nice and smooth. Because as you saw, there was just a little, what looked like excess on the top of the quilt. But now that I've kind of tugged things taut and smooth, it's all laying flat. Important to me to get that all flat before I start stitching, or I could easily stitch in you know, some irregularities pushing the fabric one way or the other. Can I make it to the point? Yes, I can. Perfect. So what are some of the comments we're getting, Dave? Oh, okay. Sure, let's have some. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So you guys probably can't hear my husband talking in the background. You're probably hearing one half of that conversation. He is my producer slash cameraman slash IT guy. He wears a lot of hats. His name is Dave. You see him in the comments. And I sure appreciate his sitting here while I quilt and do this. This is not a thing one could do by themselves, for sure. And certainly I could not. I do not have the know-how. So we've got, I think, 3 cameras going, 3 monitors today, microphone. Yeah. Keeping all those things going smoothly is in his wheelhouse, but not mine. So I appreciate his help. There's certainly some angles that it's easier to quilt with a ruler than others. I'm sure you can see that. In some directions I move much more quickly. It just has to do with visibility and the awkwardness of your arm or not. I'm going to pull the quilt back a bit. It's very difficult to do ruler work at such arm's length. I pretty much can't do it. Just leave enough room to catch that point that's way out on the left on our way around. Again, this is where having pre-marked that echoed line is very helpful, because if I hadn't pre-marked it, I would have to have my ruler on the top edge so that I could measure the quarter. And I find that awkward to have to be holding my ruler that way. So having it pre-marked, I find very helpful. We're getting there, slowly but surely. There went the ruler. Almost hit the poor cat on the head. Poor fella. I'm going to clamp this. I don't want it wiggling out of my way. So you can see there is tension on this, but I'm not actually pulling it. I'm just getting it snug. Attaching those clamps. That just keeps the thing from shifting on me. Okay, let's take another question. Sam, I'm quite short, 5'2", and sometimes struggle reaching. What are your thoughts on such a large throat and back issues? Well, I don't know if I have any magic answers for that. Sam, I'm not a ton taller than you. I'm 5'4", maybe 5'4" and a half. Um, just just last week, actually, I had my husband and son raise my machine. You can see that it's quite like it's against my lower rib cage. It's above my waist, well above my waist. And I can pretty much rest my elbows on it flat. I think it depends a little bit on what type of quilting you do a lot of. I do a lot of edge to edge quilting where I'm just going and I'm not using a ruler. And so I prefer it to be higher because then I don't have to sort of duck down to see where I'm going. When I do ruler work, generally I find that easier to be a bit lower because I lean over it more. I don't change my machine because it's fussy. If I did a lot of ruler work, I might lower my machine 2 inches to do that. And it's a trade off. It really is a trade off, but it's easier to see your ruler and put pressure on it lower, and it's easier to do free motion quilting higher. Um, for me, yeah, or have hydraulics on your machine. That's an option too, but not all of us have that option. So I think it's worth trying it a couple different ways and see what's more comfortable for you. For me, I definitely find the higher machine is more comfortable. Once again, I'm going to stop and put that clamp on. I feel like I'm pushing the fabric a bit ahead of me. We're not going to be able to make it in one pass. I thought maybe we could, but no. This time, because I'm going left, I don't think I have to put the clamp on. Well, I'm sorry this is not very scintillating quilting. However, this is certainly quilting that is going to establish a little bit of drama in this quilt, I feel like. I think this big 4-inch feather border is going to be, well, maybe not the focal point. The star is supposed to be that, but supporting role for sure. A little bit more. Well, this is the 3/4 mark. We're getting there. Hope you guys brought your coffee. I don't want to be putting you to sleep. You can probably see on the edges of this quilt, I left the selvage on when I appliqued on it. I don't necessarily want that to be part of my quilt because selvage tends to shrink up differently than the fabric, but it gave me a nice surface for my edge to work with, and I know that it is straight. I did my basting far enough in that I know I will trim off all those little needle holes that are often on the edge. of the selvage. And here you can see my selvage was pulling up just a little bit yesterday. I was getting that little bit of puckering across the top edge of my quilt, so I just went and put with my scissors just little snips every 8 inches or so. So that's how I dealt with that awkward pulling on that edge so it would lay smoothly. It's looking pretty good, ladies. Okay, we're going to advance, do the last quarter, and then we'll be on to the fun part, which is the feather. Oh, sure, I'll take comments. Anytime a 50 Shades reference comes out in a quilting session, it has to be fun. True. I mean, yeah, it's amazing how many. Where did I set my ruler? Girls? Oh, there it is. Phew. Okay, Laura, I think it's great to see the setup of the quilting. Give some options on how to long arm a quilt and get it set up. Yeah, and there are tons of options. And this is where I find early on in my quilting and still today, like there's so much I can learn from seeing how someone else does it, but I so seldom get the opportunity to see how other people load a quilt or baste a quilt or make decisions with their quilting. Early on when I got my long arm, I was lucky enough to find that in Spokane, Washington, where I live, there is a machine quilting guild. And when I first joined it, there were over 100 members, a lot of people. And one of the things that we did was at each of our meetings, we would break up into icebreaker / small groups, and we broke up by machine brand so that I would get into a group with 6 or 8 or 10 other gamel owners, which I just found incredibly helpful. Because if you were having tension trouble or you wanted to know what's a good ruler to use or any question you wanted, you could address it. And among those people would inevitably some that did each style of quilting, some that did custom work, some that did, edge to edge work, some that did pantographs, some that had a computer. And so it was really, really helpful to be able to ask those questions early on. So I hope that this helps in the same way, that you can just see the process without any frills or bells and whistles or dressing up. This is what it looks like in my day-to-day quilting. Dave, you made a comment. I missed that. Except I'm talking more. And it's kind of comical. Yesterday, I quilted I think I did 4 of the 8 large diamond shapes of the star. And so after we went off air, then I did the others. And it was kind of funny. I did better quilting, not surprisingly, off air. And I was more methodical about it. Because this definitely does break into your concentration a little bit. But it's more than made up for by the pleasure of basically having a sew day. Once again, I need my clamp. You can see how can you see how the quilt is pushing in front of me a little bit? So it's important to put a clamp on at that point to hold it steady. And I rolled a little too far. I'm not going to be able to make it up to that top point. I was watching my bottom point, making sure I could get to that and not keeping an eye on the top one. Go back up just a hair. So I'm sure you can see as we're going why I love this ruler, because I've been quilting in all directions, and this little handle enables me to grasp it in a number of ways, every one of which is equally secure, and I find it much less fatiguing if I'm doing a quilt that has a lot of ruler work. This is honestly not that much. But if you're doing, blocks and things that have a ton of ruler work in them and you're doing a couple hours a day, that makes an enormous difference how you hold your ruler in terms of the fatigue on your hand and your fingers. So I really like this little guy. I'm sure there are other rulers out there with different styles of handles that work well also. I made it to within a 1/4 inch of the edge, by the way, but I still have to back up. I've heard good things about, is it Apothecary? It's Jamie Wallen, and it's called Apothecary something. I've heard good things about his rulers. I have another funny story for you guys. If you're quilt piecers, I'm sure you're familiar with the add a quarter rulers, which are a typical cutting or measuring ruler on one side, but they have a thick quarter-inch kind of lip on the second side. The aim of them being when you're cutting out pieces, you can add a quarter-inch seam allowance. Well, again, when I was early in my long arming, I had no idea what rulers I wanted or even if I wanted to do ruler work. But I had made a swoon quilt and I wanted to do custom quilting on it with ruler stuff to give it a try. So I fished through my rulers and found this add a quarter ruler. I had it in 6-inch and 12-inch lengths. And I quilted that whole big quilt, highly custom. You can see it on my website gallery if you ever want to see pictures of it, with add a quarter rulers. Because that chunky side of the ruler is about the same thickness as an actual long arm ruler. I don't really advise it because they're not really made for that, but I just flipped it upside down so that my fingers were against that quarter-inch lip, and it worked. Oh, see, this is why I break my snappers. Don't know if you saw that on camera, but my batting was laying over top of my side clamp and I forgot to take it off. Okay, let's see the comment. I would come out. Yes, yes, I thought your name looked familiar, Laura. That would be why. No, there and Laura is saying she's moved to Central Oregon and has not found a similar guild. I'm not aware of very many machine quilting guilds in the United States, which I find very interesting. There are so many long armors. I would have thought guilds would be more common, geared toward machine quilting. And we were not only long armors. We had people with domestic machines and sit-down machines as well. But it was machine quilting. And honestly, that's kind of where I got my start with working on vintage projects. When I joined, they had just done 1 year of what the guild called a treasure challenge. And at that time, it meant they were acquiring vintage quilt tops, like a whole top. And the challenge was for the quilt maker to take it home, clean it, and basically quilt it and finish it, and then show it at the next year's quilt show. And then there were some quite nice prizes for whoever did the best kind of transformation. Anyway, so when I joined the guild, they had done that 1 year. So I joined up the next year, not knowing what I didn't know, basically. And dove in, and you received your quilt top in a blind draw. So you didn't know what you were getting. You didn't know what style or pattern of quilt it was or what colors. And whatever you drew in that blind draw, that's what you had to work with. Some of them were pretty, some of them were less so. Anyway, I was lucky enough to draw a double wedding ring that first year. And again, if you ever want to see pictures of that, I post pictures regularly in kind of throwback sort of style, because that quilt is one of my favorite quilts that I have ever finished, that double wedding ring. I had so much fun with it. But anyway, that got me kind of going on vintage quilts. And in the years to follow, we began having a hard time finding full-fledged tops that were in good enough shape to finish. And so a few years then we did challenges with each of the ladies would receive pieces like blocks or portions of vintage quilts. And then you could add your own fabric and make your own design. And that was also fun. But that's kind of what got me started on doing vintage projects. Alrighty, we're going to do some feathers now. We've been on for an hour and 20. How are you doing for time, Dave? Okay, I think we'll go ahead and quilt the feather. I don't think that's going to take terribly, terribly long, honestly. We've been twice around the whole quilt doing this border, so now we just have once around to do the feather. Let's go back to the top, like so. Oh, good. Yeah, well, we keep it real. Like the lost bobbin casing yesterday. I'm sure you guys were laughing at me walking around here, scratching my head. Where did I set down my bobbin? Okay. About where to find the bobbin? Oh, lots of really good ideas about where to put the bobbin, yes. Oh, with my for my thread storage. Oh, let's hear a couple of those because we can chat about it as we quilt. Golf tees. That are golf tees long enough to have like I need room for at least two bobbins because I sometimes will pre-wind 5 or 6 or 7 for a quilt and have two left over. Sam, I use a wide head nail through the bobbin popped on top of the matching spool. That would certainly work too. Yep. I use golf tees. I put the bobbin on top of the thread cone. Actually, both those ideas are good in the sense that with a drinking straw, it sticks up so far, right? And with your golf tee or your nail, it drops down to wherever the level of the bobbins are. Sheila, my drawers are just a tad taller than my cone, so I turn the cone upside down and put the bobbin inside. Oh, that works too. I don't think my spools have like a concave area for the bobbin. But that was going to be my next question, is if any of you have found some good drawer solutions. I know there's those white plastic ones, but like do you have to go really deep, the 8-inch ones, or kind of what's out there? Buy the long tees. Ah, good tip, Jody. I like the golf tee and the nail idea both. I'll try one of those. Okay, on feathers. This time I've got a purple marking pen, which is air erasable because I don't need it to last for very long. I'm just going to mark, I think, each speck of the star as I go. And I was looking at this last night and kind of thinking it through. And I think that I'm going to be able to do a feather, a curve around the end of the tip of my star, a curve on the inner corner, and I think I'll do two along the long straight stretch, if that makes sense. So this is my method of evenly dividing. I'm just going to mark two kind of eyebrows in there, and then I'm just going to connect the dots, basically. There's no exact science to this one. And I feel like if the point, I think you can see where I'm working, if the point of my feather were here, I would be going quite a ways up with that swoop. So I think that's what I'm going to make happen. I'm going to redraw that a little bit. I'll demonstrate to you guys how this nifty erasing pencil works. It's not really critical that I remove the line in this case. I'll move the machine over and Dave will put that camera on so you can see it. So it just allows a little droplet of water out on that spongy tip so that you can erase little areas. If you're doing any finer ruler work, you know, where you've got quite accurate points or stars or converging points, it sometimes can get confusing if you have to redraw a line, right? So this is a good way to just take a little bit out, or even marked dots. You know, it's easy to take them out. So I love this little eraser pen. It doesn't have a name on it, but it is the Soline brand, and I certainly just got it from Amazon online. Okay, so back to my swoops. I'm just eyeballing this, my two kind of eyebrows in there, and then putting some curves in between. So I'm going to be quilting a spineless feather, which is not a feather that can't make up its mind. It's just, and I don't care for how I divided that up, so I am actually going to redraw this. Now, because it's not hyper specific, I'm just going to redraw it and quilt it as I go and know which one I'm following. Have I got 3 eyebrows in there? I do. How come you guys didn't stop me? That's why it's not working. Okay, so this is real life. I don't know if I should erase it. I don't know if I should just draw another one in and risk taking the wrong track. I'm not sure what the answer is here. But I think erasing it wet is not going to be a good solution. So let's go back. So basically we just wanted a longer one there. I think I can quilt that all right. You'll let me know if it looks terrible. So another thing that I do when I'm quilting feathers, and I'll move the machine so that you can see it, where I'm going to quilt this feather continuously around the entire perimeter of the star. But wherever my join is going to be, so where I start, and then when I'm going to come around and join it, the best way I have found to make a smooth join is to actually draw a few feathers in place. So I'm going to say it's going to be about here. I'm Just kind of sketch them in. And I'm going to start quilting above that. So now when I am coming up to join from the back, I'll be able to gauge. And if I need to make any adjustments, I've kind of got the distance of those feathers to make a little bit of an adjustment. But it puts the right kind of curvature in there, and I'm pretty confident that my join will look seamless when I get back to that. And I'm sure I got that tip from another quilter, but I couldn't say who to give them credit. But it works really well. Might have been Beth Ann Nemish. She's a real proponent of using spineless feathers in borders, especially when you're doing kind of informal quilting, so that you don't have to stop and start and stop and start your quilt. You can just quilt seamlessly a set of feathers all the way around. So I do not like that one, but it's staying in. I changed my mind halfway in the middle about whether I was going left or right. Because this is informal, I'm going to stop talking for a minute while I show you this, because I might have to concentrate to do this. Because this is informal, when I'm doing my curves, I will sometimes put 2 on one side or sometimes on the other. I'll sometimes add in a shorter one. This is not going to be a formal feather by any means. But I'm probably not going to talk much while I do it, because as you see, that did not work well. At this point, I'm not going to undo it. I may come back to it. I may undo it before it's all said and done. So I'm pretending like I have a whole border there of feathers, which I don't have. I'm just going to get a little water and spritz it, and then we'll have a look at that feather. I don't know which camera we can see it best on, Dave. Oh. Can we see it? All right. Dave's going to shift the camera for us. There you go. You can see the feather. So I think to make it a little easier on myself, I'm going to do a little gentler curve, because I'm getting some very large and some very small feathers. So I'm going to make that just a hair more shallow. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy with that. I think that'll be a pretty feather when it's all said and done. So we're just going to proceed. That might be a wee bit far for that tip. I'm just keeping my far point in my vision there, seeing how far I need to be able to reach for that one. Okay. I think you can see the point on the distant camera. There's a long distance between the point of my star and this exterior point, right? So I'm going to make sure that my spine is a fair ways out there because I don't want my outer stems to be too crazy long. I might even go further out than that. Okay, now this time we're putting in 2 eyebrows. Only 2. 1, 2. Okay. Join them just a little bit shallower curve, I think, than I had on the last one. Like about so. Now, I can see where my next inner point is, so I'm going to kind of gauge from that because I need to place at least one of these eyebrows in. There again, I think I went a little deep. Go with that. In this outer area of the point? Outside of the line? Oh, good question. Are you going to quilt feathers in the larger area outside the stitched border line? I think not, because I want this feather border to be quite a focal part of the quilt. I'm not 100% sure yet what I'm going to do in the background, but I particularly like fills that have some straight lines in them, kind of the boxy, echoing boxy type. I don't know if that makes sense. So that's what I'm leaning toward at this moment. I'll probably think about it overnight, let you know tomorrow. Okay, here we go again. We'll see how this end goes. I was not sure about this part. So we'll just give it a try. I think I might put one more in there. So I'm extending my marked line just a little. The beauty of doing a very casual feather is there's no strict rules. Can we see that point? You can see that fairly well. I think that's satisfactory. I didn't get right into the point, but there's not a larger area unquilted there than the insides of the feathers, so I think that's satisfactory. To me, that's a happy medium between stretching that one feather into such a long, slightly awkward looking plume, so I'm happy with that. One more, and we'll roll. Yes, I'm definitely a fan of the casual feather. I have done bump back feathers, for obvious reasons. They're harder. They're more formal. But because I seldom do really formal quilting, I seldom do bump back feathers. I love the casual ones. There's just lots of room for imagination and kind of playfulness in making them your own, and they're just not too demanding, which I love. Okay, so my point would be up there. So there's one eyebrow and there's two. I think that looks fairly good. Pause for a moment. I can feel that my roll is getting fat, and feeling a little pressure under there. A little resistance. Oh, still a little bit more, I think. There we go. So I'm just raising my bar is all I'm doing. Certainly if you wanted a more formal feather in this, I think that you would want a more careful drawing and spacing of the spine than I've got. And an option that I have done in the past is to use parchment paper to draw guidelines on, because you can see the quilt a little bit through it. So that would be an option for planning out, you know, an exact measurement of your eyebrows and that sort of thing. And you can see even my drawn spine is just a guideline. I'm fudging it at times. As best I can, though, I'm keeping the visual line of my faux spine, if you will, as smooth as I can. So when I fudge it on one feather, I try not to, you know, make a big adjustment on the next one, if that makes sense, so that I keep that visual line of the created spine as smooth as I can. And I have to advance just a couple of inches to get off this edge here. I'm just going to take my side clamp off. I know from experience that my ruler bumps into this side clamp if I get too close to it, and it will end up setting my stitches wonky. Another option would have been, you probably can't really see it, but on the right hand side of my strap that's coming in here toward the snapper, I could put something under that to raise this up. So like a yardstick, for example, I could prop right across my rails and hold that whole strap apparatus up. That would work too, but I'm not going to run and get that just now. I think I can manage without the snapper on for the moment. Again, I'm going to visually try and think of this feather extending all the way around, even though it's not. Just like that. Okay, progress. What is that, a quarter of the way? Thereabouts. Okay. Here's our swoop. One eyebrow, two. So again, I've got a kind of understood curve at the top there. I find it easier to draw from left to right. I don't know why that would be. Did I get two eyebrows? I did. Whew. Lost faith in my counting. I think I will draw one more in. You're right, Dave. So again, I can look over the... You know, that's a good point, but I kind of need it when I'm working left, so I guess I will run and get my yardstick. I'll show you guys what that looks like. Again, this is not a tip that's original to me. Some other quilter did it. I saw it. I adopted it. So I'm just putting my yardstick right under the ribbon of my clamp and propping it on both my rails, and I can move it left to right a little bit to determine how much it lifts my snapper guide, but I'm just making sure that this is above where my ruler plate comes out so that when I move left to right, I don't catch on that. I'm going to just draw a couple more eyebrows. Again, I can see the coming point of the quilt underneath. You guys can't, but I can judge from there where my eyebrows will be approximately. Who knew a quilt had eyebrows? Okay, so there's my guidelines. I don't know that I did a great job of envisioning where that feather would be, but and I am endeavoring not to let my feathers quite bump the edge of my edge stitching or the edge of my border. I think it looks better. There, I almost hit it. I think it looks better if there's just a little space in there, and then I don't run the risk of overshooting it either. I goofed there. Enough of a goof that I have to back up a little bit. Basically, all I did was change horses midstream, so to speak. Decided to go left instead of right, but I had already stitched in the wrong direction, so it happens to the best of us. Some days it happens more often than others. And of course I did a nice little lock stitch there when I was stopping, so it's not wanting to come undone easily either. Come on, let go. There we go. So I'm just backing up to the point of my feather because that's where there is. Again, you won't be able to see it on camera, but there's already a nice little lock stitch in the point of that feather. And I'll begin with a lock stitch as well. And I think that will be perfectly satisfactory. And I've just gone over a few of the last stitches that were on that feather to make sure they're reinforced. We don't want it coming undone. I think I better stop there. Don't want to bump into the edge. Trim my threads before I go. Yeah, we won't be able to quite make that point, so it'll be 2 passes. Okay. And again, the point of my feather is quite long. I'm making my eyebrow about in the middle. It does make a very long expanse for the one leading up to it, but I think that's all right. That's the way it's going to be. Okay, one eyebrow there, one eyebrow there. If some of you are really careful quilters, you're probably cringing at my lackadaisical approach to this, but that's kind of how I quilt. And certainly my feather is not perfectly symmetrical all the way around this quilt. But it is, after all, a casual quilt. I could quilt a couple more, but I'm going to go ahead and advance so that I can kind of see this whole point out of the corner of my eye to try and get that as pleasing looking, balanced looking as I can. And I do need my side clamp on. I don't think I'll bump it, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'm going to put my little side rail in there just in case. Trying to decide if another small one would be pleasing in there or not. I don't think I will. So I've got to fit 2 more in, I feel like. How's it looking from your point of view, ladies? Tell you what, there's a reason feathers are so popular. As imperfect as these are, they're just spectacular on a quilt. They are so eye-catching. Okay. Eyebrow. To get all the way around, Dave, are you wondering? We're at 2 hours now. Well, you ladies want to give some feedback? Do you want to go a little bit longer? It's probably going to be at least 15 minutes to get around. And I did say at least. But if you're not able to stay that long, that's fine too. We're going to be, as I said, uploading this to YouTube, and it'll still be on my Facebook page for watching if you kind of want to see the join at the end. That's kind of my reason for continuing, Dave, is I want to sort of show that join at the end, how well that works. It goes more and more quickly that, you know, when I get the hang of marking it and what I'm doing in those points and things like that. Okay, let's take some comments. Laura, it looks great. I've been watching where you put the shorter feather and it looks like it's in the valley of each swell. Pretty much that is true when I'm turning a corner. To me, I like that look better than doing more longer, thinner feathers, which is kind of your other option. They get a little longer and more stretched. Just personal preference. Jody, I'd like to see the join at the end. Yeah, I thought maybe you would, and watch me flub it. That would not be good. But you can at least see the thought process to drawing those initial couple of feathers in there and how that helps to join it seamlessly. Jenna, you're doing a beautiful design. Love feathers. Oh, me too. There's hardly a quilt that a feather does not look wonderful on. Okay, continuing on. And there comes a shorter one, again in that valley, and then I kind of use the back of it as a spine. It does provide a more casual look. Having the short one and having the one kind of curved around it. Both those things, I think, make a more casual look. So if you wanted a more formal feather, those would be the first things I'd avoid. I'd go left, right, and I'd avoid the short little funky ones and the ones that are really bent back around them like this. So it all depends on what look you're going for. And I don't think I went forward quite far enough. I'm afraid I'm going to hit my front bar, my belly bar there. Just a couple more inches. Pardon me, ladies, while I grab a tissue. Okay. I'm just going to draw on this other side so I can have a visual of where I'm going with the next one. It's very difficult to visualize where my spine would actually be here, but I think as long as there are no sudden changes in the spine placement, we'll be okay. Can't really see it in the distant picture, can you? I was going to kind of stop and give you a look at the big visual. I think I went a little too far again. I'm looking at the point at the far end of the quilt. I need to be able to get all the way down to that point to get round that corner. That should do it. Kitty update. He is still laying in the same spot, just down at the corner of my machine, keeping an eye on things. Right in front of the door. I can't leave without him knowing. Oh look, I'm at the end of my drawn spine. I need to draw some lines in here. Okay, once again, dealing with my sharp point, I'm making my little eyebrow about halfway out to that point. There's my inner one. And I can't see my further point where I've got my big chubby roll, but I'm just going to try and mirror what's on the other side of the quilt a little bit, on the other side of the point that I can see, to get a similar shape in there. Okay, we're on our way. Oh, we aren't quite on the way. I didn't join that up quite right. how I navigate. This corner seems to change with every corner. But because we are going so informal with the feathers, I'm not too worried about that. One thing I do watch for is as I'm approaching it with these feathers here, I try visually not to go beyond this center line. So you can see I kept this short one in here. That if I had gone over too far with that, it makes it more difficult to bend and turn the corner afterwards. So by keeping this one within that halfway point, if you will, and you can certainly draw a line there if it helps to keep that visually in front of your eye, but I kept them on this side until I was actually turning the corner, because then I had room to bend some in there on the way back. The shallower the scallop, the dips in my spine, the less essential it feels like to have those little shorter feathers. If that makes sense, the sharper the turn, the more that aids you in getting around the corner. Very much a matter of preference, though. Make your feathers your own. Speaking of feathers, ladies, I'm going to do one more run of my all over feather webinar. Some of you I know have been to it already, but you're certainly welcome to come again if you want to. So I'm going to hold it twice this coming Saturday. Can I remember the times offhand? I believe we made it 9 o'clock and 2 o'clock. So that is a sort of similar, very casual feather, but is an all over design intended to cover a whole quilt top. So that whole webinar will be a deep dive into that style of quilting. So I'll be posting times and sign up information and where you'll get the link and things like that on my social media posts and in my Facebook group over the next couple of days. But I invite you to come to that. And like I said, even if you've been before, doesn't matter. Come again. It's all good. I'm pleased with how that corner came out. Sometimes you just don't know till you try. And I would say with feathers like this is one of the places where I do sometimes back up and undo quilting because it is the focal point. If I thought that was a really awkward movement around that corner, I would have considered undoing that and redoing it. But generally I find if I go slowly enough and take time to look ahead and be planning 1 or 2 feathers ahead, that I can manage it. It's when I don't look ahead that all of a sudden I get startled. Oh, I'm out of room, or oh gosh, I need to fit 2 more feathers in and there's only room for 1 1/2. But if I keep my eyes out in front of me, I can usually head off those problems at the pass. And that's actually a huge part of that webinar, is kind of my thought process of how I move across the quilt top and how I fit in the feathers into awkward spaces and corners, and how to fill basically square corners and straight lines of a quilt with a graceful soft feather. I probably could go a little more, couldn't I? broken my thread. I think actually I'm out of bobbin thread, but it caused the top to shred as well. I did mention this was real live quilting, right? Most machines will have bobbin sensors, and you can set them to know, how many stitches or how many revolutions of the bobbin, and it will give you warnings. I choose not to do that. I just let my bobbin run out, and then I back up to the last corner and change it out. That's just my method. And the reason I back up at least an inch or two is because, of course, those last couple inches of stitching did not have proper tension on them as they came up from the bobbin, so I think it's important to undo at least a little bit. But also, of course, it's getting you back to a good point. Question about the eyebrows. Oh boy, there's not much of a science there. Okay. I think I missed your explanation for what you mean by eyebrows. I'm just eyeballing, Jody, the distance of kind of the long straight stretch. Where are you looking at me? The long straight stretch of one of the sides of the stars. And I know that I've got to swoop this curve, the inside curve at the inside of the star, and an outside one, and I'm just putting in two curves. I call them eyebrows, just to visually kind of space them evenly, and then I just fill in the space between with the scallops when I'm drawing them out. That's all it is. If I just literally draw from one side to the other, I can't visually space them well, so I find it helpful just to draw in those little, call them eyebrows for lack of a better word. So this is how long it takes to change a bobbin, by the way. So I have one already loaded. I take it off. I put my replacement on. I start it. I walk away. So that's the amount of time I invest into winding bobbins. And for most of my common thread colors, I keep two so that I can have one on the bobbin winder. That may not work for everyone if you don't do a lot of quilting, but I do. So for most of my 50 colors that I keep on hand, I have two spools at all times. And if I did not, then I would just pre-wind my bobbins while I was loading my quilt and still not invest a lot of time into it. So when I did that feather, you can see that it's a wee bit slimmer. I was looking ahead to this point and knowing I would like a feather to be in that point, so I wanted to get one in before it. So that's what I mean when I talk about looking ahead with your peripheral vision, if you will, and kind of pre-planning what's the best way to fit it in there. If the space had been a bit thinner, perhaps I would have chosen to just do one and make it a little plumper so that it ended up with the plump part of the feather in that corner. I had a thread breakage, but it snapped. I'm wondering what happened there. I don't feel any obstructions. There was just an audible snap, which is unusual. I'm just going to take a minute and really look closely at my thread path. It's in all the wheels, in all the places still that it should be. I'm not sure what that was. You can probably see in the close-ups by now my hopper foot is starting to get very linty. That is something I usually clean very thoroughly at least once a day, and sometimes multiple times if I'm doing a lot of quilting. And I just take a little snippet of batting and poke it through there with the end of my seam ripper or the end of my scissors and just floss it, if you will. So again, for the sake of smoothness of my feather, I'm going to go back to the last corner. It's pretty well impossible to start in the middle of one and have it not show. There are faster ways to undo huge chunks other than one stitch at a time, but they involve snipping threads every so often, and then you've got all the ends to pull out. So this is usually my preferred method when I'm just doing a little bit. How often do you oil your bobbin case? Well, you know, Sam, when I'm not on camera, I usually do it about every second bobbin. My machine manufacturer recommends every single bobbin. I think that mine is plenty oily because when I park my machine at night, I have a piece of batting under where it parks and I dribble oil on that. So I feel like it's getting sufficient. That's just my own personal opinion. Again, if I talk to my machine manufacturers, they say oil every bobbin. It's impossible to over oil. But this seems to work. I have not, in all my hundreds of quilts, I have not worn out a bobbin casing. So I think that's a good sign. I'm just going to take a second and trim my thread. And I'm going to advance while I'm here. I could still quilt some more, but it's difficult to quilt pretty feathers at arm's length. So why try? I will say that about a 26-inch machine. It's too deep for me to quilt comfortably at the back, so I don't very often. But the reason I chose to purchase one that big is it is very helpful when you are doing custom quilting and you have a quilt that has blocks, you know, and they wouldn't quite fit in a 22-inch machine. That would be really annoying. So there are times when it's helpful, but when I can, I try to avoid that whole arm's length business. So here's my eyebrows, Jody. I'm just judging, just eyeballing the distance, the length of the straight side of my star. And I'm just putting in two little arcs. And that's what I was calling eyebrows, was just those arcs. And then I just kind of join them. That just keeps it fairly evenly spaced. And there was another thread snap. So something is wrong. I'm hearing that snap. Is it on the spool? I have never heard that particular noise before. My husband is saying, maybe oil your bobbin case. He's just bugging me. It is not the bobbin. But I am going to take the bobbin case out and reinstall it. Just, you never know, just in case. Can't hurt, might help. I'll just pull a bit of bobbin thread out, make sure there's no resistance there at all. It's feeding smoothly. This is very minor troubleshooting, but sometimes you just try one thing after another till you find the thing that works. I haven't talked very much today because a lot of you are repeat watchers, but a couple of you are new. This idea of doing some live and in-person quilting, last week particularly when I was doing edge-to-edge quilts, I wanted to sort of introduce myself and my style of quilting because I have an upcoming launch of an online class. It's actually next Monday it goes live. And it has to do with a whole lot of different designs that are particularly geared toward edge-to-edge quilting, but some that can also be used in custom work like this. And with that class comes a couple of bonus modules. And one of the bonus modules is troubleshooting stitch formation and tension issues, which can really be a plague if you're quilting and you keep having thread breakages like that and you can't figure out what the cause is. So what I've done is collected a bunch of ideas. So they're not my original ideas, but I've gotten them from my, the person who does my maintenance, or from other quilters, or Pinterest, wherever I've read them. I've just tried to collect as many good ideas all in one place as I can. And there I hit my side clamp. That's an undo. So I've tried to collect all these ideas together for things that you try. And it starts with the really easy ones like change your needle, rethread your bobbin, rethread your machine. But then there are some more in-depth ones like check your intermittent tension spring and things like that. But all those things can affect the quality of your stitch formation. And that can be so, so frustrating if you're quilting and you just can't get it right. Oh, let's have some comments. What do you ladies diagnose? Where does the break actually happen? It's close to the needle. It's close to the needle. It's not further back in the threading process. A tiny bit of fuzz under the thread take up on the bobbin. I've had this happen. I've also had fuzz accumulate inside the bobbin holder in the machine and actually bind up thread feed from the bobbin. The culprit seemed to be a combo of a bit of thread with fuzz. That's a good point, Yvonne. Actually, I did reinstall my bobbin, but I will pull it out and I'll get in there and clean just a little bit. And that is entirely possible. Like I've been quilting, a fair bit this morning. It's possible that there's some buildup. A side note to that, something that I love about isocord thread, and really this is true of any polyester thread, is it is very low lint. So you have the least possible buildup. I cannot imagine doing a lot of quilting and trying to do it with cotton thread or even a percentage of cotton. Just for that reason. You would get so much lint. Whew, I just flung a pin. Hang on a sec while I find it. Got it. Well, that is a possibility. I put a brand new one on yesterday, so I'll feel it though. There is a little lint in my bobbin case, so we'll get that out. See, you guys have been around the block. I see that. But for me, checking, one of the problems I was having was on the back side of my quilt. I was getting every so often little tiny bubbles, little tiny knots in the thread, and fiddled and fiddled and fiddled with the tension and couldn't get anywhere with that. And my service provider was here looking at my machine, and he was the one that suggested the intermittent tension spring, which for my machine, it's not where I adjust. Dave's going to show it. Sewing machines have these too, so you'll know what it is. It's the little wire spring that bobs with every stitch you make, and it keeps the thread from sort of spinning forward out of control. Well, you can shift that spring to be ever so slightly tighter or looser. And by tiny, I mean you turn it about 1/16 of an inch to make an adjustment. And that was all it took. My needle does not feel like it has any burrs. Anyway, that spring turned out to be the fix for me. And how easy was that? And then some of the obvious thread breakage ones too would be burrs on any of your thread holders. So another tip that I got was to periodically actually floss all those things. Run thread back and forth through them. Just to detect if you have any little rough edges. because all those things really, really matter. Alrighty, we've checked a few things. We'll proceed and see what happens. And if it still keeps happening, then we might have to have a little deeper dive tonight into what the problem is. Let's see if that does it. I've taken the side clamps off completely. That was why I originally stopped, was to get rid of that bubble of stitching from hitting the clamp. This is where I find it so difficult to picture where my spine would have been. I think that looks good. Once again, I'm quilting at arm's length, and I'm going to advance. Trim my threads. We're getting there, ladies. I think we have 2 more points to go around. A little less than 2, I think. 1 and a bit. There we go. I'm just going to put a clamp on a bit lower down. Actually, I won't be stitching against that. My feather is way inside now. Never mind me. Once again, I'm going to be careful not to let my inner feathers get too long. So I've got a little room to fold some feathers in there on the way back around the corner. Right here. And you can see I've fudged that spine a little bit. But I'm just trying to keep it smooth. We still can't quite do it in one pass. But here's our end. We're getting there. Let's see. It's a bit too long. You'll laugh at my scribbles as we quilt over them. It's pretty inaccurate. But it does give me a guideline, and that's all I really need. So I have another question for you ladies. Are you Audible or podcast listeners while you quilt? Or music listeners, or none of the above? And especially if you listen to books or podcasts, what are some of your favorites? I could always use some new listening material. And once again, I'm going to advance so I can see that whole corner in my eye as I'm working. And I'll get it closer to me as well. I don't want to be doing that at arm's length. It's just too difficult. And I'm going to lower my quilt a little bit now that I've gotten rid of a bunch of the puff on my take-up roller. Yes? Oh, nice. I grew up in BC, Sam. We've actually only lived in the U.S. for about 10 years. And, but way north of you. I was up on the Alaska Highway. You'll probably know where that is. Oh, yeah. Prince George is pretty northerly, all right. Oh, good for you. Okay, I feel like I've got too many swoops in this one again. I don't. So I've got a story for you guys. I don't think my... Well, you lived in Dawson Creek. Okay, that's totally my stomping grounds. Got a story for you guys I don't think my daughter will mind telling, but since you listen to Canadian True Crime, check out, Sam, episode 55. Episode 55 of Canadian True Crime is about a murder that was committed in this little hick town, which happens to be right next door to the town I lived in. I know the parking lot in which it happened. But the young woman who committed the murder was a psychiatric patient, and guess who was her nurse? That was my daughter. And I think because the podcast is public, there's no information from that I couldn't say. So anyway, this young woman who ended up being the murderer had been under doctor's orders, you know, for certain medications and things. She had obvious mental health issues, and she appealed this, I don't know if enforced is the right word, but she was required to take medications. So she appealed that, and my daughter was part of that appeal process, and this young woman won. And then it was just a couple weeks later that she stopped taking her meds and went on and killed a man. So, but that was just a wee bit too close to home. But it was very fascinating for sure, listening to a true crime story and knowing how closely involved your kid was. I don't know if you noticed there or not, I made another bobble. I went left when I should have gone right. But I thought that one looked smooth enough to be okay. Left in place. You be the judge. No, I'm definitely a fan of true crime podcasts. I also found one recently that's called Declutter and Organize, and it is particularly geared toward crafters. So I've listened to a few of those episodes, and they're really good too. It's just some great tips for addressing UFOs and making decisions about them that I found to be helpful. I feel like that is something that is a journey. You never arrive, you never achieve having an organized crafting space. And you know, mostly I'm okay with that because it is all about being creative. But I also know for myself anyway, I work better in a space that is less cluttered rather than more. So that's always a goal of mine, is to not have a bunch of half-done things hanging around. That seems to take up mental space. For me, anyways. Okay, I'm getting close to my lines here, so I'm going to trim my threads. And I'm just going to, because I did it with an air erasable marker and they're largely gone, I'm going to put them back in. I can still see them. I don't know if you can or not. I'm just going to put those feathers back in so that I really have a visual guide coming up on them that my eye can really see. They're not pretty, but they're in there. So I can be deciding as I'm quilting, can I fit in one or two more? Do you want to show me the other camera, Dave, so I can kind of see? I want the close-up one if I could. Already I can see back here. Well, it would be too big for one, so I'm going to squeeze two in there, and there's room for two on this side without any problem. So I've already got that in my mind, how many feathers I'm going to put in there. But having those ones kind of penciled in really helps visually, for me anyways. I found that to be super helpful way to plan out feathers. So there I am coming up on that one. You can see I've got a little excess space on the right, so I'm going to do a bit chubbier one. There's that one done. And there's that one. And I'm going to end right in that understood spine. Do a nice little reinforced stitch there. And I'll spritz a bit of water on that because it's difficult to see when there's both markings and quilting. So let me get a good view there and get some of the purple markings out. Just takes a minute for that to disappear a bit. Oh, our one camera apparently bit the dust. Wow, the purple is really intense. Hopefully you can see the quilting. I don't think that you could tell looking at that which feather I stopped or started with now, and that was my goal. So that's your takeaway tip today. So we have quilted a feather all the way around the quilt. Next time I'll be back. I'm just on the side camera. Hey Dave, I'll get in the view of it. There we go. Oh, now I've got both. So next time, and it'll probably be tomorrow, but for those who are watching later on YouTube, in the next episode, I'll be working on the background and doing some fill in that. I'm going to purposely make it a little bit finer in scale than this feather because I want this feather to be the thing that pops. And it probably will not be feathers, or at least not solidly feathers. It may contain some. So I welcome your ideas if you want to comment on the Facebook or YouTube post. I welcome ideas. And sure, let's look at some comments before we go. I totally thought your accent was Canadian. Yeah, it totally is. I can't help it. That, and I apologize all the time. I love the trick to have your meeting place. Yeah, your meeting up place drawn out. Yes, it super, super helps because it's all about visually placing things, right? That's what makes them look graceful or not. So if you know where to go with it, that it's in your eye has a place to fit things in, that works. Jody. Okay, why did you use the purple to mark the feathers instead of the blue? Honestly, I could have used either one. The purple is an air erase, so by tomorrow when I come to quilt again, it'll be gone anyways without any effort on my part. So I tend to have more of the purple markers on hand and to use them for my little short-term visual aids. And the blue, they're more expensive. I have fewer of them and I use them for things that I just want to last overnight or for a couple of days. So that's the only reason there. Jody, that was amazing. Seeing that was definitely worth waiting for. Well, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Always love a good feather. So. Oh yeah, podcasts. Oh, Sam, some ideas. Great. Dark Poutine. Haven't heard of that one. Minds of Madness I've heard of but haven't listened to. I will definitely check those out. Sheila, I'm a music gal. Get too distracted if it's words I have to pay attention to. Music styles change up from classical to oldies to rock to country. Good. I would honestly love to know some actual playlists. You could even post them as a comment in my on my Facebook page because I would love some playlists. I love country. I love 50s. Yeah. Jana, mom-in-law was born and raised in Calgary. Yeah, been to Calgary lots of times. So Canada's a Canada's a good place. And Fort St. John. Well, that's where I grew up. Was in and around Fort St. John. So there you go. Jody, I would really like to listen to books while I quilt, but I find my machine is too loud for me to really hear the words. Instead, I often put on music so I then can go in and out easily. True. So my solution to that is I have noise canceling headphones, and that's what I listen to my Audible books and even often my music on that. In terms of it being distracting, I kind of see that point, but 85% of my quilting is edge to edge, so highly repetitive. So generally, I find that I do okay listening to a book because I don't have to put a whole ton of thought into what I'm quilting. Lisa, the Quilt Fiction podcast by Frances O'Rourke Dowell. Ooh, good idea. Okay, I will look that one up for sure. Maybe even tonight. Thank you for those ideas. Eileen, I have a son as a police officer, and I'm always glad to hear about things after the fact. Yeah, you wouldn't want to hear about it during, would you? And the good news in my case is my daughter wasn't actually involved in the crime. She was very close to it in terms of time and knowing the young woman and treating her. So, anyway, thanks, ladies, for tuning in. It's been fun. It is so pleasant to spend my mornings quilting with you. So, we'll do it again sometime. See you next time.